I am very, very sorry. I've been sat here talking at you for that long and I have lost a viewer at the time. So, sorry about that. I'm presuming that Clans and Dynasties, you're the only other person who's actually managed to stay around. What a mess up. That is crud. But maybe I'll be able to edit that out. Or I shut it down and restart the stream. I don't know what's best. All good, yeah. Now I'm back now. Hopefully, if people are watching this afterwards, they've put up with, a minute of me just talking and not moving my mouth and stuff like that. So maybe I can cut that out afterwards in post-production and it won't be too bad. But I'll just start again from where I was before. Basically saying that this is the sort of the January stream and introducing the idea of what I want to be sort of covering in today's episode. So looking at talking about the filming, the enjoyment of making it, talking about the different episodes coming up. So I've still got 3 episodes left in this series. So those 3 episodes are, the next one going out will be Jupiter and Jupiter Dolichennus. So Jupiter and Jupiter Dolichennus is focusing on, well, first of all, the king of the gods, Jupiter. The next one after that will be Jupiter Dolichennus, which is focusing on like a Syrian version of Jupiter. Then after that, I'll be looking at the native British gods. And then after that, it's Mithras and Sol Invictus. And there's quite a few misunderstandings about Mithras as well and about what his cult was about. But I've put that together and those will be coming out soon. The editing for the Mithras one is just taking a little bit longer than usual, but hopefully that will be uploaded shortly. And then you'll be seeing that in the next week or so, with the hope that that will be going out next Monday. So that's an interesting one there. Just trying to think of anything else to basically sort of update on. As I've done the editing, it's been a lot of learning, obviously. I think some people who've been watching regularly have probably noticed that there's been a bit of an issue with the microphone. One of the things is, obviously I did a lot of editing, sorted everything out, but then it seems that when I've uploaded it to YouTube, it's changed the way the sound files work. So I'm actually currently chatting with someone in the background to help me with the editing, and hopefully I'll get that sorted as I go forward. So that's the hope there. But there's all that to sort of play around with and learn about as I go, because there's so much to learn as I go through, as well as doing the videos, the talking, the editing, all of that stuff. But that'll be good fun. And also apologies for the lighting. As you can see, it's the first time using a virtual background. So when I've been playing around beforehand, I finally got it to this. I kind of need to get the brightness and the contrast sorted a little bit, but I don't want to be doing that while it's live. So that's one there. So yeah, if anyone has any sort of questions just to start off with, okay, that's definitely not what I want in the chat. I'll be removing you. But yes, are there any questions and stuff like that about the series and about just anything I did? Obviously, I think I'm talking to a crowd of 1 at the minute, but at the same time, always good to start chatting and see who else joins. Did you enjoy the music at the start, by the way? It's by the band that I use for my intro and extra. It's a band called Event Horizon, and I very much enjoyed their music, so I thought I'd use that as the intro. Hopefully that won't get it copyright striked and removed, but that was the one right there. Just to check that last word, blended, beginning. Yeah, no, so I've pretty much covered quite a bit of what I said at the beginning. Everything else was just hello and welcome. I hope everyone's doing all right. So it was just the sound and light, obviously sound and lighting here. don't worry about spelling. It's always a funny one. I can't talk about spelling. When I put out my videos, obviously I put them out onto the I put them out on Facebook and share them to like about 30-40 different Facebook groups. And when I put them out onto 30-40 different Facebook groups, there's a couple of different things. So when my spelling is actually put into question, either I'll have spelled something wrong, or I'll have accidentally used wrong grammar or something like that. There's always at least one a week when I put it out. The other funny one was when I used British English, and an American lady tried to correct me on my English and said it was wrong, which I thought was hilarious. But yeah, it just happens pretty much every single week that there is something that I need to sort out or correct or go back, and by the time it's already gone out, I'm just like, oh, I'm not going to like want to go through that again. And so because of that, I just leave it out there, and if anyone questions my spelling, I just hope for the best as I go through, because that's half the fun. But yeah, mostly it's been just catching everyone up and just basically introducing today's one, which is just talking about the Roman gods. So, and the music, by the way, as I sort of mentioned earlier, it's a band called Event Horizon, and Event Horizon is it's a French and Austrian band who does folk music. And when they do this folk music, I actually know Giza Frank, who is one of the main flutists and musicians for it, and asked him if I could put it as the intro and extra music for the actual the videos. So that's why I thought I'd also put it on the live stream. Yeah, so looking at all the different topics, so just mentioning it, the different topics, I put it out there. I'll pull up that poll actually in the background now, but I've been chatting away with people in the background because I'm hoping to maybe do some collaborations with some other content creators. And when I've been wanting to do those collaborations, there's some different things that I've been looking at. The next series will be on the Anglo-Saxons. I've decided that. And I've got some stuff from last summer that I filmed on an Anglo-Saxon capital city called Adgefren, which was the King of Northumbria's capital in North Northumberland. So that one will be a series coming out relatively soon, but I want to do a quick little series, maybe 3 or 4 episodes, on who were the Anglo-Saxons, looking at a lot of the recent sort of linguistic, genetic, and also early settlements. So talking about that sort of stuff, that's something I really want to set in place. Whether or not I'll get time is another matter, because I've also put quite a big project on my plate, and that project is that I'm planning to walk Hadrian's Wall very shortly, and I'm planning to walk it in Roman kit. So when I'm really, thanks Shane, I'm glad you enjoy it. I'll come to it in 1 minute, but yeah, I'm planning on walking Hadrian's Wall in full Roman armour. And I just did a dress rehearsal earlier today, practicing with the kit and getting everything sorted out. So that is the plan, and that's going to be in February. So that's going to have an effect on video creation, because as you can see, what I do for a lot of the videos at the minute, just due to weather and time constraints, is I'll use green screen. So it's quite funny here as I'm looking around, I'm in my office, but right behind me there's a green screen, but obviously you can see my wonderful Roman office, as I like to call it. And this is actually a real place in South Tyneside, which is better known as South Shields. There's a Roman fort that was excavated, and they've called it Arbea. They believe it's Arbea Roman fort from the Notita Dignatum, which is a late Roman document which says all of the offices of the commanders throughout Hadrian's Wall and the region around it. And so they've reconstructed the late Roman commanding officer's house, and this is the office of the late Roman commanding officer's house. Pardon me, sorry. So when I do meetings and stuff like that, I regularly use this as my sort of my digital background when I'm using stuff like Zoom, or I'm using stuff like Microsoft Teams, all of those different ones. So just to give you an idea, there we go. This one here would be it looks like a wardrobe, but it would actually be where you'd have all of the scrolls and the books inside, and that would contain all of the information. They know that from later documents. So if you look at the Anglo-Saxon Gospels, like the Lindisfarne Gospels, or I'm trying to think of the other one, the Codex Animus, which was discovered in France, that will be basically they use that as the example for it. So Shane, what period are you doing? First century or late Roman? I'm going to be doing late second century to late second with the kit. So that's the period I'm trying to do. First century is obviously when I'm looking at Hadrian's Wall. I thought about first century, but obviously Hadrian's Wall wasn't constructed then. It's very much a second century feature. So I thought I'd do a second century this time, but I'd love to do it in late Roman in the future. But my late Roman kit, I'm waiting on some stuff to be delivered. Unfortunately, due to COVID, as you can understand, some of it has actually been lost in the post. Well, not lost in the post, sorry, but delayed quite a bit, which is, it's just the way things are. Welcome to the new viewers, by the way. It's great to have you with us. So yeah, it's second century at the moment. I'm going to be dressed as, and then later on, I'm planning to do a 4th century impression and walk Hadrian's Wall again, but I don't know if that will be this year. It all depends on time. In regards, going back to clans and dynasties question about what I'm wanting to do, it's Anglo-Saxons next and looking at Adgethrin, which is the Anglo-Saxon capital. Then after that, I'm keen, because I looked at the poll of what people wanted, and the next one was something about the Anglo-Scottish borders and the conflict between England and Scotland. So that's what I'm really keen on doing next. Basically, I think that'll be a really interesting one to see how people basically look at this sort of history, because often the Anglo-Scottish wars are really heavily focused on like Braveheart and stuff like, people look at it as in like, how best to explain it, they look at it from a very Scottish side or a Scottish nationalist side, and I'd much prefer to look at it as like who were the main parties, who are the main contenders, and really go for something like that. I was really surprised how low Vikings polled, actually. Vikings didn't poll well at all. I thought they were a lot more popular, but I'm a little bit pleased about that, because I don't particularly like Vikings half as much as other people. So the Anglo-Saxons polling higher than Vikings, definitely a win. But with the Hadrian's Wall walk, I'll be filming a lot of that, and then that will go up as well to show off the Hadrian's Wall walk. Future video, could you do a video about the history of the northeast, like Lindisfarne, Whitley Bay, Tynemouth? I'd love to, Laura. That's actually something I'm looking at the minute. September, the Lindisfarne digs will be back on again. There's going to be an archaeological dig at Lindisfarne in September. So my plan is to go up to Lindisfarne and do some filming on Lindisfarne, and also produce a series at the same time. So I thought I'd tie that all in together, do the Lindisfarne one there. Tynemouth, I think I'd do maybe in the summer. I'll see how it goes. It's quite a busy place, so I might need to time that one right when everyone is either away or it's a little bit quieter. Whitley Bay, I think again I'll tie it into Tynemouth. It might be more of an industrial history later one rather than an early history, because my real passion is from prehistory right up until the sort of end of the Middle Ages, and then I lose interest until the Industrial Revolution kicks off. I think it's to do with the Roughs and the Tudors. Totally turns me off. Can I ask, I've done the Roman reenactment for 14 years, and that walk is last on my yeah, the Hadrian's Wall walk is full on. I've done it in 3 days before, and that was just in normal 21st century gear, and that was knackering. I'm looking at 4 or 5 days for this one. So I'm going to do a Monday, Tuesday. I have to take a break due to a family event I need to be at on the Wednesday, and then the Thursday, Friday, Saturday I think I'll finishing at Segedunum Roman Fort. I try and take a one-way train ticket to incentivize me to make sure I come back, but I think that's the plan. So I've got to look at that. That's going to be my job for next week, booking a couple of places to stay, recording it as I go. Hopefully I'll do some live stuff while I go along as well. Put up a little bit of Facebook Live or content while I'm out and about on my phone, because I will have some 21st century gear on me. There's some wonderful stuff, like for instance the ability to have power packs nowadays, and just to be able to pull out a power pack and just to be able to charge your phone on the go and stuff like that makes things a lot easier. And then you can just go with that and just build content as you go, because you guys will be interested in what I'm doing, and you may not want to wait for the full videos to be edited, which could take a month or two because of my work commitments and all the other stuff as well. But we'll get there. Yeah. And also, if you're questioning, Shane, about the Roman kit, there's also an element where I'm also learning at the same time how best to actually make a lot of the stuff. So I've made it from scratch to put the stuff together, and the Hadrian's Wall is good fun. By the way, Shane Kent, just to check, are you also the author, Shane Kent? Because that it's going to sound bad. I haven't read any of your books, but I know of you from a distance, if that makes sense. One sec. Yeah. Ah, got you, yes. I now know who you are. Cool. Yeah. Sorry, I had to do a quick Google search there. Apologies for my ignorance. Does anyone else have any more questions, by the way, or just before I sort of launch into the sort of the content in the videos and what I enjoyed making, or that sort of stuff there? If you've got any questions, or if just throw them in and we'll see how it goes. Just wait a little bit longer just to see. Welcome to the person who's just joined. Class to have you here. Yeah, sorry. I do apologise. Just seen you mention. There's another author that I may be getting you confused with. So just to sort of cover, I sort of promised this would be focused quite heavily on the Roman Gods series that I've been putting out recently. But just to sort of, to start off with, I did... Yeah. Well, if you'd like to drop a link, Shane, in the comments to anyone who comes along afterwards, please feel free, because I'm happy to promote other channels. And that's a big one that I'm keen on. And if you want to have a chat maybe, or do some collaboration on the Roman stuff, happy to do that as well, because I love talking about it, especially if you're like 1st century. My interest is at the other end. I'm at 4th, 5th century in the end of Roman Britain, so that's one of my big interests there. But just to start off, I'll talk about some of the videos. So going right back to the start of the month was obviously the basis of Roman religion. And when I was starting off with the basis of Roman religion, I started off by researching sort of like the early Roman gods and stuff like that. And what my real amazing, this is back in January 6th, the 6th of January. Sorry, I'm just pulled up my content screen on the side, and YouTube does it the American way. So I got that, I read it out that way by accident. But when I was looking at it, the Roman gods, what really interested me is how much of a mix they actually are. Because when people are looking at the Roman gods, they so often just summarize them and say, oh, they were exactly the same as the Greek gods. And when I've been doing my research, it's not the case. It's really not the case. The Roman gods actually hold a lot more to the Italic tribes, the Etruscans and the Sabines, than they do to the Greeks, especially until like the 3rd, 2nd century BC, when like that's when you see the real influence of the Greeks coming through, as there's more and more conflict between the Greek world and the Roman world, and then obviously the conquest of Greece and all of that sort of stuff. Before then, you know, the main influences are going to be Etruscan influences, Sabine influences, Italic tribes, all of that stuff. And even, you know, if you go further back to the Carthaginian Wars, you know, when Rome is fighting against Carthage, they changed some of the ways that some of the gods are worshipped to actually tie in and try and get the Carthaginian aspects of those gods in. So that was a real interesting one for me, because it was looking at the fact that, you know, Jupiter isn't necessarily Zeus. You know, Zeus is actually a very, very badly behaved god. And just today I actually saw that Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to do a film called Zeus, which I found hilarious, because I was just like, I wonder if they're going to include some of the parts of his mythology where Zeus, you know, transforms into a swan and then sexually assaults women and stuff like that. It's pretty horrendous. When you read Zeus's mythology, he's a horrible, horrible god by today's standards. By Greek standards, you know, back then in the sort of that period, you know, that was sort of like the gods were callous, they were cruel, they weren't like, you had to bribe them onto side. They were quite unpleasant creatures, and we look at them and we're just like, gosh, you know, like, you know, today people think of like Zeus up there, and we think of the Hercules film, the animated one that Disney did nearly over about 20 years ago now, if I'm pulling it correctly from my memory. And like Zeus is seen as like this loving father, like this American dad, and actually, you know, he's pretty freaking horrendous. And so like the Roman Jupiter is a lot more respectful in many, many ways, and is seen as much more of a father figure, and he gets a lot more influence from his Etruscan counterpart. And that's sort of where we get the Capitoline Triad, which is Zeus, Minerva, and Juno, because they are seen as like an adoption of the Etruscans triad, the three most important Etruscan gods. Please forgive me off the top of my head, by the way. I can't remember their names, but when you've got that, you have that connection right there to the Etruscans. And so when you've got these Etruscan deities, it's quite an interesting one, because the Etruscan deities then influence the way the Romans do it. And in I mentioned this in the video that's just edited actually, and is going to come out on Monday, about Jupiter. But when you're looking at Jupiter, he actually has quite an interesting one, because of the fact that it's said that the second king of Rome, who is Numa Pompeius, actually sat down with Jupiter and had a chat, and they decided how the Roman religious system would work. So the sacrifices, the holy days, all of that stuff. And the thing for me is, I'm just like, is that a historical event? So is in like almost like a synod. Like, I use the Christian term synod, because it's like when all the bishops sit down and discuss an issue that affects the church. So I'm wondering, like, in the sort of the period of kings, like in the 7th century BC, or that sort of period of time, 7th, 8th century BC, are the kings of Rome sitting down with their nobles and going, right, how are we going to do our religious system? How are we going to do it? Are we going to take this influence from this culture, this influence from this culture? And then when they're building all of that up, and they are welcome to the new viewers, by the way, great to have you here. Please put something in the chat if you've got any questions, and I'll just keep going where I'm going. But like Numa Pompeius, it's said in the mythology, sat down with Zeus to decide how the religious system would work. So if that's the case, is that a real historical event, as I've just mentioned, or is it mythology? And it's just like he did some religious reforms at that time. When he did the religious reforms, then that went into mythology as him and Jupiter having a heart to heart and deciding how it would best work within the Roman system. And that's something I really find interesting. In myth and legend, how much of is actually truth? So, like, for instance, this is totally jumping out of the content for today's live stream, but like when you're looking at stuff like Troy, people thought Troy was a myth until they discovered that city in the late 19th, early 20th century with the German archaeologist. I can't remember the details off the top of my head, I do apologize, but they thought it was a myth until then. Now obviously we know that there is a basis for Troy, and whereas the war didn't exactly happen exactly as you read it, in the Iliad or in the Trojan War, it did actually sort of seem to occur as a long-term conflict between different peoples. So that's something I find really interesting there, between the different sides of how those sort of mythologies worked. So with that as well, I sort of looked at the development of their Roman religious system and how it all came together, and like how Rome in itself was seen as quite a holy place. Then moving on to the next one, I looked at Mars. So Mars, that was on the 10th of January, and that was Mars, the bringer of war. Obviously I had to do that after the name of the musical piece. But Mars was amazing, and the thing I loved the most about the Mars episode was discovering that Mars had more animals than just what you generally think. So obviously some of his animals are the wolf and the bear, but he also had the woodpecker. And I love the fact that he had the woodpecker as his animal. And when he had the woodpecker as his animal, it's like, the reason why is because the persistence of the animal, keeps tapping away on the wood, and eventually it makes a hole in the wood in the tree. And so Mars's animal, the woodpecker, shows that the Romans believed that warfare wasn't just about like major battles, victory, or the ferocity of a wolf or the strength of a bear. It's way more than that. It's about tactics. It's about long-term strategy. And if you can do enough critical damage to your opponent, then yeah, you've won the war. And so like having that as well. And another one I thought was absolutely brilliant, I found this so hilarious, was the goose. Like, geese in Roman mythology was seen as a violent animal, and so Mars is associated with geese. And so that was really quite a cool one, to think of an animal that we think is a farm animal today or a domestic animal was actually like this creature that the Romans thought was a violent animal, and they associated it with Mars. So there's some really cool stuff there. Like, and how Mars was not just a war deity, but also was a farming deity as well. And that was something was also really, really cool for me to look at, like the fact that Mars's priests would dance with swords and spears, and when they danced with swords and spears, that was to bring fertility into the land. So, you know, Mars is way more complex than people give him credit for, because they just see him as this war god, but actually he's so much more multifaceted. And again, going back to the Greeks, Ares is opposite, violent, destructive, seen as tearing down society, not a positive deity in any way, shape or form. But when you've got Ares, he's very different to Mars, because Mars, on the other hand, is seen as positive, as building up to society, loads of things like that. So I've really enjoyed the Mars and the Mars one, because of the fact that I learned so much about it, and it was a way of really getting into the Roman psyche, and also looking at other stuff as well, like Mars, not in one of the myths at least, not being born of a woman. Not being born of of Jupiter. So Jupiter in one of the myths is not his father, but Juno actually goes to Thrace to actually become pregnant, and Flora, the goddess of plants, places a magical flower on Juno's womb, and then suddenly, boom, she's pregnant with Mars, and she gives birth in Thrace. And obviously the Romans saw the Thracians as this powerful and warlike people. And so when they saw the Thracians as this powerful and warlike people, you know, they looked at that and they were just like, oh yeah, you know, Mars was born amongst the Thracians. Yes, it's kind of cool just putting it all together. And so I really wonder, you know, like how much Mars, you know, was actually influenced by Ares, and how much like the Romans just kept him separate. That was a really, really cool episode for me to do. Excuse me one moment. Then obviously, thankfully, just a couple of days later, well, next day actually, I actually hit 1,000 subscribers. So that was really cool to be able to just hit that and then go on from there and then build the channel from there. But the next episode that went out was about Venus. And again, everyone always, you know, just summarizes as Venus as a sexual deity, and always sees her as the goddess of love or sexual attraction. And like, you know, you can think of that image of Venus coming out of the clamshell as she comes into the sea. Now, obviously, her creation in Roman mythology is quite a sexual creation, because Kronos's testicles. No, wait, sorry. Kronos's testicles are cut off, and they're thrown into the ocean, and then they cause a wave, and the wave then gives birth to Aphrodite, to Venus. And it's the same in the Greek myths as well. So waves were often seen as synonymous with semen. And so when you have them synonymous with semen, you know, it's like out of the testicles of this deity and the ocean, because she's also a water deity of many ways, then you have Venus is born. And so that's a very interesting sort of like creation myth for the goddess of love. But she's also she's a luck deity as well. And when she's a luck deity, she's also a victory deity. And I was amazed at how many different shrines and altars and things like that there actually were on Hadrian's Wall, and on the Antonine Wall. And there's a wonderful, wonderful plaque on the Antonine Wall of Venus on a dedication stone, I think by the 2nd Legion Augusta. And so you've got this wonderful thing where Venus is being honoured by soldiers, and obviously a connection with Julius Caesar, because Caesar says he's descended for Venus. It's really, really quite cool to bring all of those sort of things together. So again, Mars isn't just a war deity. Mars is also this fertility god, but then Venus is also a goddess of victory. And then in the Roman mythology, they're almost depicted as a married couple, whereas obviously in the Greek, Ares and Aphrodite, they struggle a lot. And Aphrodite is actually married to Hephaestus, who is the blacksmith deity, and Mars and Aphrodite, Ares and Aphrodite are having an affair, whereas in the Roman system, her marriage to the Roman equivalent Vulcan, it's not really mentioned half as much. So it's almost like Mars and Venus, the married couple, and then a relationship with Vulcan is very much overshadowed. They very much see that Mars and Venus are the pairing, and Mars brings stability through warfare, Venus brings luck and fortune and all of those benefits to society, as well as being, in one of her forms, a goddess of sexual purity. So when people think of her as the goddess of lust, she actually was seen as a stabilizing figure to Roman society rather than a destructive figure. You know, she was supposed to remind Roman men of their fidelity within the wedding bed and stuff like that. So it's a really interesting one to have a look of all of that. And obviously Mars and Venus, they have a child, which is Pax, or peace. And Pax isn't just like peace as we'd understand the dove today. The dove is our symbol of peace. But Pax is like social peace. So like Pax stops riots, Pax brings about a unity of society, and Pax is also associated very much with the emperor during the imperial period. So Mars and Venus's child, being the god of peace, the deity, the female deity of peace, is a really interesting one, you know, because you'd think a war god and a goddess of sexual attraction, you wouldn't necessarily think of them as having this responsibility of creating a child, which is the goddess of the goddess of peace. So really, really cool to see that. So I really enjoyed that video. Don't know how many of you got a chance to see that one about Mars or Venus, but those were very early on in the month. Then I looked at Hercules, Neptune and Mercury. So those were the next ones. Really enjoyed this one as well, because like Hercules he's a wee bit of a tragic deity within the Roman world. So like, whereas you'd think that, you know, Hercules, you know, we think of him today through like there's this brilliant 90s TV show of what is it, the Adventures of Hercules, that was it, and then there's the animated series as well. But like his birth within the Greek myths, so he's a Greek deity, he's a Greek hero originally, and then the Romans turn him into a deity later. But he's a hero, so he's not necessarily divine until his death. But his entire childhood is horrendous because he's not Hera's child. Zeus and Hera don't give birth to Hercules. Instead, it's another affair that results, and unfortunately, if you look at the mythology, it's a rape. And then from there, obviously Hercules is born. Hera goes out of her way to try and murder him with snakes, and his entire childhood is horrendous. Then he finally gets married, he settles down, he's horrendously strong, he's this great hero, and then he's struck by madness by Hera. And when he's struck by her madness, he murders his family, which is often overlooked when we think of Hercules. You know, like, you just think of this great hero doing all of these tasks, but the reason why he needs to do the tasks is because it's redemption. And then after the end of the tasks, he has another struggle and he actually dies. That's a very good question, Dennis. Can I come to that in 1 minute, Dennis? I have seen your question, but I'll come to that in 1 minute. Dennis, blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, Adventures of Hercules and Zeno. That's the one I'm trying to refer to, actually, Clans and Dynasties. I couldn't remember the name of it. But he then does obviously the tasks, the famous 12 tasks of Hercules, and then finally at the end of his life he dies and he becomes a deity. Now the interesting thing is, in the Roman world, he was actually worshipped as a god of children. And we often think of him as this absolutely huge, you know, muscle-bound Hercules. And in the video, I compared him to like some of the famous rugby players. You know, these massive guys whose, you know, forearms are the same size as their calves. Massive, massive, huge blokes. And he does look like that when you look at the actual carvings of Hercules throughout the whole of the Roman and Greek world. They make him look like a huge guy. You know, he's not like a triangle as we see as the perfect male body today. He's a rectangle. You know, Hercules' body is a rectangle, whereas today we think of, you know, the attractive symbol, like the desired body shape, as almost being like a triangular shape. No, it's just pure muscle. But because of his really difficult childhood and his, you know, being nearly killed by snakes when he's just a newborn baby, he's actually seen as a god of children. He's actually a protector to children. And so women would actually worship Hercules for their children. So this is another thing about the Roman gods that we get so wrong today, is the fact that we see them as like, oh, Mars is only a male god, Venus is only a female god, Hercules is a male god. No, anyone can worship them. And so when anyone worships them, you know, there's there's this sort of balance there where, you know, people can choose whatever god they wish to venerate at any one time. So like, because of the trauma that Hercules went through, he was seen as a patron to those, and he was a tragic hero. And sometimes there's other aspects as well where he's seen as sort of like, people would pray to him from like what's almost we'd consider mental health issues because of the fact that he had suffered madness, you know, that sort of stuff. So he's quite an interesting one. I'll just jump out to answer your question, Dennis. I actually know of one person who worships the Roman gods today, and you know, he regularly will do sacrifices of, or what's called a libation or a drink offering, to altars that he has set up in his home, and so he worships them. Whether or not he is a true Hellenist pagan, I don't know, or if he does it as just like comfort. But I don't know how many. There's a few people who've tried to reinstall Hellenistic paganism and have it as a real religion, but I don't know if it's bigger in like Spain, Italy, France than it is in Britain. I think in Britain, as far as I know, the main form of paganism would either be Druidic, modern Druidic, because the ancient Celtic religion compared to what we see today as modern Celtic religion, they're totally different things. Modern Celtic paganism is more related to a 19th and 20th century folklore in many, many ways. And then obviously the other one would be Norse paganism, where again, we're really thin on the ground. And my old accountant, actually, not my current accountant, but my accountant before that, he was actually a Norse pagan, and really lovely guy. You never think about it, because you'd always think of these guys who are Norse pagans as having their beards, you know, plaited and wearing their Thor's hammer and, you know, long hair and loving like heavy metal. No, not like anything like that. Short hair, lovely, clean shaven. Wouldn't say boo to a goose, yet he was a Norse pagan, and that's where he found religious affinity. So, you know, people choose many different faiths depending on what they want to do, but I only know of one Hellenist pagan, to my knowledge. There may be others who venerate them in just like in name only, but I don't know of other pagans off the top of my head. But that's one there. Yeah, every so often I have to take a drink. And so that was really interesting for me there to look at Hercules. Then alongside Hercules, there was Neptune and Oceanus. And so Neptune is obviously a really interesting one too. Neptune and Oceanus together. So Neptune seems to have started off as a river god, because the Romans themselves, they were hill people. You know, Rome is founded on 7 hills. And when they're hill people, you know, that's... They lived up by the hill, and they had the river going through, the Tiber going through the city of Rome. So Neptune starts off as the god of the Tiber. But then as the Romans expand across Italy and they take over what is now modern day Italy, and then go into other places, they actually adopt him as a god of the Mediterranean. So I'm just going to read the question. Did the deities change in line with societal changes? There's a notable parable we can see where there's a long-standing god of X suddenly adopted other things due to large influxes of cultural terms. I'll come to that question in one moment. It's a great question, and yes, that is very much something I've noticed from my studies while I've been doing this. And that's a brilliant question. But I'll just finish talking about Neptune and Oceanus, and then I'll come back to that question. Basically, with Neptune, obviously he starts off as a river god and becomes the god of the Mediterranean, but he's also still a river god. So you'd be perfectly fine if you were, let's say, on the Rhine or on the Seine, the Thames. I'm using the modern names, not the Roman names, obviously, of these rivers to worship Neptune. You could say a prayer to Neptune when you're on any river, because he's a river god and he's the god of the Mediterranean. Oceanus, though, the Romans, they found Oceanus, they found him very uncomfortable. They found him terrifying, and actually, it doesn't seem as initially he was worshipped as a deity, but more as an idea, because the Romans, on some of the maps, they view it as he's almost seen as a belt around the world, a water body around the world. So you'd have the land in the center, and then around the edge of the world there would be a belt, which would be Oceanus. And so when you have Oceanus, he is seen as that sort of outside element in the world. You know, you have the center of the world, which is the land, the Mediterranean, and the Roman world, and then Oceanus on the outside. And so I found that very interesting, how he went and evolved from being like this river god to suddenly becoming this much more in-depth deity of the other things, whereas Oceanus is seen as really dangerous because he represents the Atlantic and possibly also the Indian Ocean. Oceans so large that, you know, the naval technology they had at the time just wouldn't allow for them to be effective as you know, as for the ships to be effective in those areas as much. You know, they had to hug onto the coast a lot more back in those days, because obviously the ships were only designed for a certain amount of journeys. You know, they wouldn't have survived an Atlantic journey as much as, like, you know, if you are in a part of some history groups, they claim the Romans and the Egyptians sailed to North America. I am incredibly skeptical, and I just think that's more mythology than it is reality. Now, as to the gods changing with societal change, yeah, there's a really good one, and this is the last of the Roman gods current series episode. I look at Mithras and Sol Invictus, and also in the episode that's coming out on Friday, which is Jupiter and Jupiter Dolichens. Very interesting gods. So with Sol, throughout the whole of the Roman period, there is a sun god, Sol. But in the later period, from the 3rd century onwards, he becomes the unconquered sun, Sol Invictus. And that's because he's influenced by, you know, what we would constitute today as Middle Eastern ideas. And so Sol becomes the unconquered sun, this deity that at one point was nearly a monotheistic deity, because Egablagus, I do struggle with his name, Egablagus, he made him Helos Galabagus. Helos Galabagus. You see, wonderful thing about video editing, I could cut that out. I can't do it on a live stream, and you should see that what ends up on the cutting room floor. But Helos Galabagus was the Syrian sun deity, and so what Egablagus did was he actually made him a monotheistic god of the Roman Empire, with him as the chief priest, and that led pretty much to his murder, because the Romans were not keen on monotheistic cults until the conversion to Christianity, starting with Constantine with the Act of Tolerance, but then finally the full conversion over to Christianity later on with Justine the Great. I need to double check that, sorry. I am still learning as I go, but the full conversion to Christianity, where all other gods were banned in the later part of the 4th century. So the gods did change. Sol goes from just being a sun deity, who was sort of sometimes synchronized with Apollo, god of messengers, Mercury, trade god, but he was never seen as a major deity. You know, you'd have temples to him and you'd venerate him, but he was always like, he was just there, it was the sun. But definitely in the 3rd century, the societal change, where you have Aurelian, who nearly makes the worship of Sol, or Sol Invictus, as the sole religion of the Roman Empire. You know, that had a big effect, and, you know, obviously Aurelian gets murdered by his own soldiers. But had he lived longer, maybe he would have tried to make a monotheistic sun god as the single god of the Roman Empire. So these gods do change depending on the requirements of the empire at the time. So for instance, Jupiter Dolichens is heavily associated with the Septimian dynasty. The Septimians use Jupiter Dolichens and his consort Juno Regina for the health of their dynasty, and very much worship them. They're very, very interconnected with those gods. So there's some very interesting stuff going on right there when it comes to like how deities changed over time. And then going back to the episodes, Mercury. Mercury was a load of fun as well. I know I keep saying they're a load of fun. All of these episodes were good fun for me to edit and to learn about. I like Mercury because in the Great North Museum in Newcastle, there's a wonderful, very Hellenistic depiction of Mercury as this naked youth holding, on one hand he's got his winged stick, and in the other hand he's got a globe, and he's got a box representing trade at his feet. And then right next to this Hellenistic, wonderful, carved, beautiful image, there's something that is just like, it's like a kid's drawing. It's like a stick figure. And it's like they've done this the square for his body. They've stuck a head on the top with a smiley face. They've got lines coming off the top representing the sunbeams he was associated with. He's got his arm out as a stick, with holding a stick. And then there's a little sort of square representing the box on the floor. And I want to say it's a kid's drawing, but in all reality, not everyone is a perfect artist. Not everyone can commission, your little altar to Mercury or Mars to be perfect. And so you take, a little chisel or a piece of metal, and you take your slab and you just carve that in to the best of your ability. And then with Mercury being the god of messengers, being the god of trade, being a god of also mystical communication and in many ways magic, all of those sort of things, they were massively, massively important, and when they were massively, massively important, they would basically just want people to worship those gods. And when they wanted them to be worshipped, they would say, right, okay, how can you best interact with this deity? How do you view them? And when they were viewing them, they were just whatever your ability, you try and make something so you could venerate these deities. Because if you couldn't venerate the deity, then that's your access to the gods. That's your way of talking to them. That's sorry, I'm trying to summarize what I'm actually trying to say and trying to say it well, but without having to being able to access the gods in the way that you could, with a small idol or something you can make a sacrifice to, people would struggle. They would struggle. Just before we sort of move on, are there any questions, or is everyone still awake? The chat has gone quiet, so I'm just double checking. I'll give you a moment to all do it. Or I'm just talking to a wall and you've actually all muted me, and you're just keeping it running in the background out of sympathy. Cool. No bother. If you don't mind, it's nearly been an hour, so I'm just going to have a quick comfort break, and then I'll be straight back. Sorry. I will come back to that in one moment. I've just seen your question, but I will be back in 1 second, just because of the fact that I just need to quickly pop to the gentleman's, but I'll be right back after that. But if you give us 1 second. I'll see you in 1 second. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Yes, class. So just to sort of go, I'll look quickly at the chat, so I'll be silent for a moment. Well, Dennis, I'll start with your question first. No, I don't think there will be a new Roman Empire. There may be other empires that we don't know about yet, and the world is always changing, but the Roman Empire is just something so of its time that I don't think anything could be like it again. So that's just one there. Laura, my favourite period, I mentioned it earlier on, but I think my microphone wasn't switched on but at one point. But my favourite period of history is from prehistory right the way through to sort of the end of the Middle Ages. So, you know, in Britain, when it's generally counted when the Tudors come into power. And then from the end of there, I just lose interest. I just never liked the Tudors. And so my interest starts coming back in the 1780s again with the industrial history. Like the Industrial Revolution, the technology, the fact that people were so like, you know, they had, it was do or die. You either succeeded because you'd made something of yourself, or you just died. So like, I love the industrial period and that. And then I think I overdid First World War, Second World War in school. So I basically just went, nah, I don't really like that as much. So for me, that was the period that I really didn't enjoy. And so for me, anything I think after 1945 I call politics, because it's still having a ripple effect on us today. Yet even decisions over 100 years ago, even in the last 150 years, are still having ripple effects on our world that we are still coming to terms with. Europe's treatment of China, for instance. China, the way it acts today in the world is because it doesn't ever want to become a minor power again. It's scared of ever being a minor power again, so it's never going to allow that to happen. So that's why sometimes when we look at China, they seem bullish or like ferocious. But that's because they remember what happened when they could be pushed around, and they're never going to accept that again. Same with Russia, you know. So that's still having ripple effects on us now. But that's just modern politics. So anything in the last 150 years, I don't call history, I call politics. Well, 50 years, so since 1945 I call politics, but you could even extend that to 150 years ago and you'd still be right in calling it politics, in my opinion, rather than history. But sort of going back to some of the other questions, clans and dynasties, you asked about any of the Italic pantheon. Some of the early Italic tribes, they're not very well documented. And rather than thinking of them as a pantheon, you have to think of them more as like what's sometimes called Indo-European gods. So when they're just called Indo-European gods, they're more like concepts. So in my studies, and I need to do more reading to be 100% certain of this, but like Sylvanus, the god of the wild, he feels almost like the least fleshed out in some ways of the Roman pantheon, because he's just the god of the wild places. So whenever you're in a wild place that's not being developed yet, you know, Sylvanus is the god you pray to. He doesn't feel as fleshed out as even like what you consider his female counterpart, Diana, to be. So I think in some ways the gods that would have been of regional locations, gods and spirits, they just became like what's called the Roman concept of genus loci. And the genus loci, and the genus loci were the spirits of places. So I mentioned this in my last video when I talked about Roman religious symbols, weird cults. That video that's just gone out. But that one there, the genus loci, they were deities where you'd have, let's say, a stream, or a thicket, like a thicket or a wood, or like a hill or a special place, and they were spirits of that location. So and also Romans believed that like trade unions or like a body of people or a voting bloc, a voting tribe. So like today, obviously everyone, every family, every person within most Western, within Europe and North America, I'll say that for certain because it's my area of knowledge. You know, each adult gets a vote, whereas you'd have voting tribes where you're like certain people were given rights by your tribe. So your tribe would have a genus loci, or a spirit of that tribe. And then when you had those as well, you could also have a city would have it, or like the business people of a city would have a genus loci. And so I think that those smaller deities that didn't make the cut became genus loci. And so like a suburb could have its own genus loci. Your house had genus loci. In the Anglo-Saxon period, they're referred to as hobs. And that's where you would get the word hobgoblin from today. Like a hob was a household spirit, or the god of your hearth. So your fireplace where you cook food would have its own little spirit in the Anglo-Saxon period. So they are the deities of that. Sorry, Laura, I've just seen your message there. One sec. Learn from the past so you don't make the same mistakes in the future. You hope so. You really do. You really do hope that people learn from the past. But there's a joke I know of amongst my friends, amongst historians, and it goes: those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. Those who study history are doomed to watch other people repeat it. And that's a phrase that always tickles me. I just think it's so true, because, like, you know, I think as a person, just if you think of your own human journey, like your mum, your dad, your grandparents will have said to you wisdom. They'll pass it to you and they'll said, don't do this, do that, you know, do this, do that. And when they said that to you, you probably as a teenager went, nah, I'm not listening to you. That's daft. I don't want to live like that. And then by the time you're in your mid-20s or 30s, and again, sorry, Laura, I don't presume your age in any way. I'm presuming that everyone in this chat is of a similar age to myself, which will either work out for me or not in other ways. But yeah, with that, people, like, you only learn later in life. That wisdom is through life experience a lot of the time. And you live and learn, and you try and do your best you can. So, but that's just hard knocks that I've learned over my years, and I hope for the best. Yeah, you learn it for us or not. So yeah, that's sorry about the background noise, by the way. I keep getting pop-ups because one of my friends is sending me a load of information, and I need to figure out how to stop that from affecting. Hopefully, can you still hear me, just to check? I just need to know, because I've turned something off so you won't hear my computer making noise. I'll just wait a moment just to double check. Well, hopefully the chat will tell me in a moment. If you can't hear me, please tell me now, because I really need to know. It says the mic is still on, but we'll find out in a minute. So yeah, going back to the gods, and the next episode was on Victory, Fortuna, and Diana. So again, this was a good one. I really like Fortuna. For some reason, she shows up a lot on the Hadrian's Wall frontier, and she's almost seen as like the goddess of, she's worshipped a lot in bathhouses. Sorry, oh, hello, Baba June. Great to have you here. Long way. Class. Okay, so I know that there's a little bit of a time delay as well, but that's absolutely fine. So if you think I'm not responding quickly to your message, I do apologize. I think there is a mild time delay as well, but nice to have you with us, Baba June. So yeah, to talk about the goddess's Victory was interesting because of the fact that she is obviously the spirit of victory, you know, victorious. You think of the Romans, but she's very much a military goddess. The Greek version of Victory, which is Nike, she is about sporting events. She's about athletes, you know, Olympic Games, that sort of stuff. Romans just took the idea and just went full on military. So, you know, they venerated Victory for military conquests. And, you know, if you didn't venerate Victory at the end of a campaign, things are going to go bad for you. So that was a big thing about her. And there's some lovely depictions of Victory on Hadrian's Wall. A lovely one from Housted's Roman Fort, which is really well excavated. But hopefully there'll be more maybe depictions of her showing up. But she's a very interesting deity. Fortuna, goddess of luck, fortune, good governance, and also bounty. She, again, in other parts of the Roman Empire, I'm not entirely certain, but I know from the Hadrian's Wall frontier that very much so that Fortuna is associated with like bounty, and I wonder if she was almost associated with the supplies coming in and making sure the wall had enough supplies and the troops were supplied, because she's always shown with a cornucopia, which in other parts of the empire she isn't always depicted with the cornucopia, but the cornucopia, which is the horn of plenty, is very much depicted on her statues on Hadrian's Wall. It's like I can't think of a single depiction of Fortuna that doesn't have that, but most of her stuff is found in bathhouses, which is an interesting one for me as well, looking at it, because like, was her worship associated with bathhouses? Was she associated maybe or connected with a British deity? Or it's just an interesting one, but very much like that. And then Diana is a nature goddess who is sort of seen as the goddess of arable land, but also could also be seen as the goddess of like the wild spaces, very much of wild spaces around different locations. So again, very interesting one to look at them and their responsibilities as well. Then the second to most recent one, the imported gods, German and Gaulish. I took some risks on this film, this one, because what I decided to do was I went, okay, with the German and Gaulish gods, I put in a goddess who is often considered as a native British deity, and this is the goddess, one sec, one sec. What's her name? I do apologise about this. Just had a total mind blank. I hate it when it happens like this. Sorry. But I occasionally forget what I'm on about and I have to go back to my notes and stuff like that. Corvona. Yeah, sorry, Corvona. Goddess of the... Sorry, Baba June, I'll answer your question in one moment. Because that's a good question. Really good one. But yeah, so there's a water deity, but they originally thought she was a British water deity and she was specific to the Hadrian's Wall frontier. But they found loads of shrines to her now in Spain and in the Rhineland frontier, so they think she's a German deity that's being brought onto the wall because the troops of Broccolita Roman fort are German troops. So that's another one there. Other ones as well, I looked at Eponia. I absolutely love Eponia as a deity because obviously she is where we get the word pony from. So she is an imported deity. And then there's a few other ones as well, as like Tyrannus and stuff like that. Gaulish sky god, it's Gaulish version of Jupiter. So whenever you see Gaulish troops, generally you see Tyrannus, who is represented rather than Jupiter, because of the fact they're worshipping their version of the god. So Baba June, are we lucky to have this parts? Are we lucky to have the parts of Hadrian's Wall that are left, or was there a concerned effort to prevent it from being hauled away to become parts of other structures? Very, very good question, because Hadrian's Wall is a really interesting one. When I do tours of Hadrian's Wall as a tour guide, and I have North American customers, so often my customers will turn around and they'll be like, you know, why isn't there more of the wall? And I'm just like, well, it was recycled. And then they're just like, how could they do that? That's terrible. This is history. This is so important, stuff like that. But you have to understand the difference in age. So like, and this again, it's like, if you think in the city of Rome, like they go back right to the 8th century BC. So when they go back to the 8th century BC, whenever they dig in Rome, they're going to dig up something archaeological. And it's a nightmare for town planners in Rome, because basically if you dig, you're finding something historical. Up on Hadrian's Wall, Once the Romans had left, the wall's in the way. And when I say the Romans left, I mean the central government. The soldiers are probably staying, because they're probably 2 or 3 generations of soldiers have lived in the same forts by the end of Roman Britain. And Roman Britain could anywhere between 410 and 450. Most people say 450, but I would go as far, 410, whereas I would go as far as 450, because that's when you really start seeing the sort of the Germanic expansions and the wars with the Anglo-Saxons coming in on paper. And so I'd say that there would still be an established Roman culture into the middle of the 5th century. Now, in the late Roman period, the only part of Hadrian's Wall that's important are the forts. There are many towns, they're regional structures, they're defensive positions, and they have the legitimacy because they are what's left of Rome in Britain, in the northern frontier part at least. So they have prestige. If you can control a Roman fort, you've got something going for you. So like we find Anglo-Saxon brooches, we find burials, all sorts of that sort of stuff in and around Roman sites. So because of that, they're using it as a prestige thing. Now, as you go into the Middle Ages, suddenly you need to build castles. And if you've got a load of pre-quarried stone, you could just use that stone and build yourself a castle with it. So that you recycle what you've got. In the same way, later on, as you're coming into the industrial period, you're having to build small villages to exploit the coal that's in the northeast of England. What do? Well, just outside of Newcastle, there's a village called Wall, W-A-L-L, Wall. And Wall is made up of Hadrian's Wall. It's made of the stone from Hadrian's Wall. So you don't blame people for recycling it, because if the wall, the estimates of it was 6 meters high, 2 to 3 meters thick, and stretched from coast to coast. So it's a huge structure, plus the forts, which are designed to either hold 480 men right the way through up to housesteads with 1,000 men. So then you've got families, civilian structures outside. You get a sense of how huge this was, possibly estimates of up to 11,000 troops on Hadrian's Wall. So, and you're living there for 300 odd years. So when you're living there for 300 years, you're going to not just stay in the same buildings that were built in AD 122, you're going to rebuild them. You're going to reconstruct the buildings. You're going to try and do what you can to try and make it as more comfortable for you. So sometimes you quarry new stone, sometimes you recycle stone. So how much of the Roman forts, or how much of Hadrian's Wall was recycled by the time of the end of Roman Britain? For instance, at Segedunum Roman Fort at Wall's End in Newcastle, in the east end of Newcastle, Hadrian's Wall was built over a stream, and this stream was actually subverting the wall, and it caused it to collapse 3 times in its history. When it collapsed 3 times, it just kept collapsing, and so they needed to do work on it. When they did work on it, they took blocks of stone, either from the headquarters building or the commanding officer's house, because in the late Roman period there's actually a bit where the commanding officer's house isn't required anymore, or the headquarters building isn't required anymore. So what they do is they actually try and take apart one of the buildings and use it as repair material, and the other one becomes the place where the commanding officer lives. So the commanding officer sometimes would move into the headquarters building. So when the commanding officer moves into the headquarters building, he lives in there. And the commanding officer's house gets just demolished. So in Wall's End, we've got large blocks of stone, which probably would have been from the commanding officer's house, now being used to actually rebuild Hadrian's Wall in the 4th century. So we judge the people of the the 5th to the 19th century and say, how dare they take apart Hadrian's Wall, when the Romans were recycling as much as anyone else. They recycled way more than we would imagine. Look at statues of emperors. They would, one emperor lasted for a very short time. What do? You've got a wonderful statue of him in military dress. You just take off the head, or you recarve the head to be the new emperor's head. Why cause yourself loads of bother? Why cause so much trouble for yourself? These people knew how to recycle, and they would, so that they wouldn't have the bother. And it's only when you have an established emperor with a good economy that they actually make new stuff and you know, do that as a prestige thing to show off what they're able to do, their money and their power. I'll just have a look at the questions for 1 second. Oh, you did! Rational Zubran, sorry, I had to look at your name there. Yeah, so was that the one with, what's his name? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I did. That was actually what started my YouTube channel, Rational. So I was meeting with that chap. I'm sorry, it's quite tired, so I'm trying to remember everything at one go. So with you're getting history, you're getting a wee bit more history than you are some of the other stories. But Robson Green, that's it. So Robson Green was doing a walk along Hadrian's Wall, and it was more like a focus on Robson Green, him as a person, stuff like that. And as Robson Green came along, they contacted me and they asked me to talk to Robson Green. And so I sat down and I went along, met him up. And as I met him, we talked for 3 hours on Hadrian's Wall. And it was scorching in June, really, really hot day. And when it was a scorching hot day, I'm there with my jacket on, I'm with my shirt, all of that sort of stuff, and I'm boiling. But we speak there for 3 hours on Hadrian's Wall. When it comes to the TV, actual TV, it's 3 minutes long. So I decide, 1 second, I'm just going to get rid of that person from the chat. Remove. Sorry, I'm just going to remove that smut. Remove. Class. Sorry about that, everyone. So yeah, walking Hadrian's Wall with Robson Green. And so then I thought, well, actually, what I'll do is I'll do a follow-up video. And when I did the follow-up video, that follow-up video was what started my YouTube channel. Because I thought, why not? I'll just go out and do these videos and actually tell a story so that people can't edit out what I want to say. And so Robson Green, walking Hadrian's Wall with Robson Green is actually what started my YouTube channel, which I find hilarious because he's a nice enough guy, Robson Green. It's just trying to actually pin him down to say something. It's really hard. But yeah, that was a fun video. I'll put the link to my response actually in the chat because that one was good fun to do actually. I find it hilarious, amazing that I've got nearly 130 videos on the channel now. 1 sec. Yeah, that's the link to my response to Robson Green, if you want to see that one. So, clans and dynasties. Is there an area of the wall and fort that has been repaired to the complete former glory, or has there ever been an effort to do this or maybe make it happen? Well, the closest you'll get is what you can see behind me at Arbea Roman Fort. So they redid the 4th century cavalry barrack, and they redid the 4th century commanding officer's house. And they did the gatehouse as well at Arbea Roman Fort. But the problem is that there's a real big rift with archaeologists. There's a small group of archaeologists who are about reconstructions. And there's a much larger group who are not as keen on reconstructions. When they're not as keen on reconstructions, they basically just don't want reconstructions to happen. So there's a tiny bit of Vindolanda Roman Fort where they've redone a corner tower of Vindolanda Roman Fort in wood and in stone. And from that, they've reckoned the wooden forts would only last about 8 years before they need rebuilding, just because of that. One of my dreams would be to see the actual fort rebuilt, or a fort rebuilt, fully excavate a fort or build a fort next to a excavation site and really show off the Roman history so that you had a location for people to visit. Because I look at the Netherlands, I look at Germany, I look at Austria, Cartunum in Austria is a really good example. Or in France, where they are rebuilding a medieval castle with medieval methods. and that's a really great tourist site. And I just think these sort of sites are amazing. And I for the future, one of the things I'd love to be involved in is fully reconstructing a Roman fort, because the effort and itself would be a tourist attraction. It would create jobs, and I think that history history and archaeology have a responsibility not just to record and to teach, but also to inspire. And so I think these sites would be really good for inspiration as well. And that's, you never know in the future where I could be, and that's something I'd like to do in the future. What innovations did the Romans brought to Britain that we still use today? Well, so Laura's question back here. I think, well, obviously, we could talk about plumbing, we talk about roads. Roman roads are people talk about Roman roads a lot more than actually were there, because they think all Roman roads were built on top of original native British roads that could date back to the Ice Age. And they think that they are the paths of least resistance of the native populace throughout all time. So, like, for instance, the Mesolithic Britons, then the Neolithic Britons, then the Bronze Age Britons, who would become what we know as the Celtic Britons, their paths are the ones the Romans then put stone over. So, like Roman roads, we talk about the efficiency of Roman roads. All they did was turn them into to metalled roads, as we'd understand them today. Bathhouses, well, they're pretty big, but again, it's... People always talk about the Dark Ages and what happened after Roman Britain. But the thing is the Roman Empire worked on the basis of a massive industrial powerhouse. And without the coinage was raised from taxation from the industry, and then as the industry collapsed and the taxation collapsed, you're not going to be building massive stone forts again. So what do? You use wood. Britain is still much more heavily wooded back then than it is today. It's probably about 15 to 20% wooded, possibly by some estimations, compared to 10 to 11% today, which is roughly what it's been since the medieval period, or like the Norman invasion. 11% wooded is roughly about right, and sometimes it goes backwards and forwards. But the Romans then used the woods, and then they would build wooden halls and stuff like that inside the Roman forts. So like these what are considered Dark Age halls and stuff, they might have actually been perfectly reasonable Roman structures that are based on basilicas. The basilica is the continental word for a large cathedral-like church. And so a basilica, was also the trading place in a Roman town, but they were also used as the headquarters buildings. The headquarters buildings was based on a basilica. So in the late Roman period, why not rebuild it in stone, but rebuild it in wood? Because you've got large woods nearby and you can do it. So I'm always wary when it comes to like the Romans gave us all of this stuff, because some of it never left, but sometimes things change. Some things don't necessarily... Like in the modern age, how many people still have... Fewer and fewer people have a landline telephone. More and more people have just a mobile phone. Like me and my family, we don't have a landline. We just have our mobile phones, because, if you need my number, my mobile phone, you can call me on my mobile. And, that's how I do it now. I don't need a landline. I just use that. So in the same way, the Romans don't need these massive stone-built buildings, the commanding officers' houses, stuff like that. They change, they mutate, they transform. And so that's like the Roman technologies, we do still use some. Like you could say plumbing, you could say roads, you could say stone-built buildings in theory, that we use today. But I almost like turning it around and go, what did Britain give the Roman Empire? And like, for instance, the boots, we think Roman military boots came from Britain. It's because previously they were using sandals, caligae, and they swapped to these closed boots that become the military boots, and they're famous from Vindolanda Roman fort with over 6,000 copy, 6 to 8,000, if I remember correctly, individual Roman shoes from Vindolanda. And that's only from like a 10-15 year period of the fort. So if you can imagine like 400 soldiers getting through 6 to 8,000 boots in 10 years, You know, you're getting an understanding of the consumption of these forts, and that's one fort with 800 guys in. So then you put that across the whole Roman frontier with 11,000 troops, and that's when you really get the sense of how much consumption the Romans brought to northern Britain. You know, like the militarization of that frontier, with every one of those soldiers requiring an iron, you know, or iron sword, a spear, you know, spear bosses, replacements, hobnails. The logistics required for like the Roman military frontier in Britain is huge, and there's been estimates that the whole of Roman Gaul, or what we now call France, had a military garrison of 5,000 to 6,000 troops. Northern Britain, so this is like York North, or the area that was called Britannia Secunda in the later period, is estimated to have 22,000 soldiers. So like half of England has got 22,000 soldiers. The whole of France has got 5 to 6. The Rhineland frontier has got 6,000 soldiers. You know, you realise how militarised Britain was in the Roman period. You know, like, and that's why, you know, when you want to, you know, be a usurper, you want to revolt against the emperor, where do you go? Where do you want to be posted to be a usurper? Britain. Because then you can get all those, you can, you know, just take off the cream of those troops and go and fight in Europe. So that's why there's so many usurpers, and there's only a couple who were successful, like Constantine the Great. He's successful, but like he's the minority. The majority of them died horribly in France or the Rhineland. But like Britain, you want to revolt. If you want to revolt, you go to Britain. Aye. You're entirely correct, Laura. Yeah, that's the best way of summing up what I've tried to say, because when I'm doing my research, and like I would show you my library, but there is so much here, like, or to do with my books and my research. I'm seeing a lot more fluid history than a set in stone history we get taught in schools. Way more fluid. It totally changes. And that's why I like doing these live streams, because I can do a video, but I might not be able to like actually give out to you what I want to actually say. And I hope these build over time, you know. I hope more people turn up and actually tune in and chat and stuff like that. I set it all up so you could see everything. And in fact, maybe I'll show off some of the stuff in a moment. For instance, just to give you an idea, if someone were to subscribe to my channel during one of these live streams, that's what will pop up. If someone made a donation, or if someone made a super chat, so like send me a private message that they wanted me definitely to read out, I set those all up, and also membership as well of the channel. So I've set it all up so we can do this long term. I would like to try and do this once a month, every month. Just so that's why I've started using this OBS, the green screen behind me, all of that sort of stuff, so that you get a better viewing experience, and we can just sit down and chat about history. But yeah, that's this whole thing. Coming up soon, I hope. Oh, go ahead. Was the militarization of Britain more to do with the distance from Rome and the logistics needed to move men there than an actual threat from the natives? I don't. I almost think, looking at it, it doesn't seem in the same way. Oh, thank you, Baba June. I really appreciate that. That's really kind, actually, because I do try and learn as much as I can. But going back to clans and dynasties question, the militarization of Britain, I don't think it's to do with the distance from Rome, because the thing is today is we're so used to cars, motorways, stuff like that, and so we don't see the world in the same way the ancients did. The main route for traveling throughout the world in the past is the seas. So the west coast of Britain, and you've got to constitute Ireland as a part of this, is connected to the Mediterranean a lot more than the East Coast, because what you've got to do is draw a line down through the British Isles. When you think of the British Isles, I might actually quickly set this up just so you can see this. 1 second, but I'll keep talking while I'm going. But like Britain is divided in two if you think of it in this way. So, one sec. Let's see if this actually works. I'm going to quickly set this up just so I can talk while showing this off. Because I think let's choose Roman Britain in AD 121. There we go. Cool. Can everyone see that? Well, I presume you can. Let's put it over here. So yeah, this is Britain in AD 122. And so when you've got Britain in AD 122, yeah, okay, send backwards. Okay, there we go, class. A wee bit of technical difficulties, but thank you for your patience. So, Britain AD 122. We've got right here the Irish Sea, and it goes right the way down, and so that's how it looks. Then on the other coast, we've got the North Sea, and basically, because of the curvature of the world, where Hadrian's Wall ends and Wall's End, that's on the same line as the Netherlands and northern Germany. Oh, because the curvature of the world is a globe, so you can go overnight from where the end of Hadrian's Wall is, across to the Netherlands. So that's great there. Then the Irish Sea, if you follow this down here, you'll come to the northwestern tip of Spain. So if you're setting out from, let's say, Israel or Palestine, you set out from there, you go across through the Mediterranean, you stop at maybe Sicily, then you stop in the Straits of Gibraltar, which was called the Pillars of Hercules back then you go round northern Spain, stop in the northern western tip of Spain, or you stop in Portugal, and you refill there, and then you've got a straight line. You can maybe stop in Brittany or in the southwest of France for wine, and then you make your way right up, and you come in, and you can either stop down here near Bath and Bristol, or you can go into Chester, which is a Legion force, or you can go right into Maryport, which was a massive port right here for supplying Hadrian's Wall. So Britain is accessible. And Britain is connected by sea. You don't need to worry necessarily about the supplies, because you're taking out of Britain gold, tin, lead, like the Pennines, which is the central spine if you think of England, right here, the Pennines. About a quarter of the Roman Empire's lead came from the Pennines. So Britain's not a poor province. They're drawing just as much out of Britain as they are, putting in some ways. They're taking out dogs, slaves, fabric, possibly even food, because we know in the 4th century, one of the Roman emperors desperately needed to get supplies for food from here, from the eastern coast of Britain to the Rhineland. So he took a load of food from Britain. So what if Britain was actually a grain basket? What if Britain was the way that you take from the very fertile eastern coast of the British Isles? All of this is really good farmland. So maybe the militarization is to actually protect your grain basket, because the Rhineland is a nightmare. It's dense woods. Where do you get your food for the Rhineland frontier? Do you import it from like the Middle East? Well, it has to go all the way through the Mediterranean. So you can't rely on North Africa necessarily. So Britain is a grain basket, in my opinion, for North Africa. Could work. I need to do more research, but it would work. Maybe we need to find some food levels and resources from from the Rhineland frontier and see if it's British grain. It's just really interesting stuff. So I wouldn't say it's the distance from Rome that means it's so militarized. I'd say that Britain is a wealthy province, much more wealthy than people give it credit for. And so that's a really interesting one right there. The importance of the British Isles during the Roman period may be way more than people give it credit for, because they always emphasize the cold, the wet frontier. It's a bit warmer than it is today by 1 or 2 degrees. they're growing wines on the growing wine on the south coast. So there's something going on here, and I think we're getting more and more of an image that this place, and York as well, especially in the late Roman period, Eboracum, because of the fact that Constantine was elevated there, it's a very important imperial place. And it's got a palace built by Septimius Severus, and obviously there's the connection back to Hadrian and Antonius Pius. Well, Antonius Pius never visited, but Hadrian definitely did. So from Hadrian onwards, you've got emperors. You've got emperors' connection to the British Isles as well. So does that answer your question in a roundabout way? Because it's a very hard one for me to say that the distance from Rome was the reason why it's militarized. I think it's militarized because of the fact that there's so many more reasons. I mean, there was always the temptation to finish the conquest, because the resources of Scotland aren't, well, what we today would call Scotland actually is obviously slightly different, because all of this here is actually England. I always like pointing this out. This is much of this here. It's actually almost like can I do this? No, I can't do that. Anyway, this whole area, this sort of area here is actually England. I haven't done that very well, but a lot of that is England because of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom in Northumbria. But what we call Scotland today was actually like a part of many of the kingdoms. If you see the sort of the lines, the red lines there, they were sub-kingdoms, or they were seen as like vassal states in many ways, we think, of the Roman Empire. So they could have easily gone up, and like Septimius Severus was doing genocide, or Septimus Severus, depending on how you want to pronounce his name, was doing genocide in Scotland during the Roman period until he died in York, and then his sons hairtailed it back to Rome to make sure they become emperor. They could have easily committed genocide and wiped out everyone living in Scotland and resettled it. But they couldn't because of political things. It was other political events in the empire that were the main reasons why Scotland never became conquered. I mean, even like Tacitus, he says that the Romans could have conquered the whole of Ireland in they could have conquered it with one legion. So like when we see legions, we always think of them as 6,000 men, full complement. In reality, they probably functioned around about 4,000 men. I don't think many of the legions were functioning at full logistical strength throughout the whole Roman period. But if he thinks that one legion can conquer the whole of Ireland, he's got like a lot of belief in his ability. And it's not just because the guys are strong, but he just knows that the technological advancement, like he knows one legion, he can probably take on the whole of Ireland, because he reckons that the tribes will submit and they won't unite, and he can take them out piecemeal. And so like when they're looking at Caledonia, like Septimius Severus, 30,000 men attacks Scotland, and he loses huge amounts due to hit and run tactics, and alongside that as well attrition. So very interesting one there, but that's one there. So I'll just hide that. I'll get rid of that for the time being. Chuck that into the backgrounds folder. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question and like just brings that area a wee bit more to life for you. Any other questions that people have or anything like that? This is where I find out how long the delay is. They could have tried, yeah. But why would they try? Well, the thing is with Ireland is that they can trade with Ireland. And the thing is that they probably, whacked up the prices and did massive, like, trade, how best to explain it? Trade tariffs on the Irish. There was probably massive tariffs. So, like, your Irish chieftain sitting in what is now Dublin, he's laughing because, like, yeah, he's having to pay 25% tax on everything he imports from Roman Britain, or Roman Spain if he's got direct trade routes. But in the same time, he's selling it to the rest of the Irish chieftains, like the Roman wine and all that stuff, and he's probably selling it for 3 times the price he's buying it for. He's laughing. we know that there's a trading post in Dublin, and you know it caused a lot of trouble when the archaeologists discovered a fortlet, a Roman fortlet and trading post in Dublin. Like the IRA sent terror threats to the archaeologists, like their lives were made hell because the Irish were never conquered by the Romans. How dare you? You know, there was no Roman invasion of Ireland, but you don't always need to invade your enemies to control them. Sometimes you can control them through economic means. You know, if they're wearing our jeans and listening to our music, you've won. It's more insidious in so many ways to control your enemy by doing that. And the Romans knew this just as much, you know. Get your Irish chieftain addicted to nice Roman wine from the south of France and you're winning. You know, he's not going to send as many raids because he wants to ensure that his Roman wine turns up. And it's interesting because we actually see like there's coins from the 3rd century when Britain is independent. And again, some of you listening are just like, wow, okay, Britain was independent from the Roman Empire. In the 3rd century, the 50 years crisis of the 3rd century, for around about 20 years, Britain was an independent state under 2 different emperors. And it was a part of the Gallic Empire. So at one point it was Gaul plus parts of the Netherlands, Britain and northern Spain. And then later on it was just a rump state of the northern part of France, probably like Brittany and Normandy in Britain. But when it was independent, you know, those areas there, they seem to have used Irish or hired Irish pirates as a navy. And they were the Atticotti. There's the Atticotti and the Scotii, who were used as a part of the Irish, part of the British forces during that period. And then later on, there's four cohorts of Atticotti stationed in Greece and in that part of the Mediterranean. So, like, they're recruiting troops outside of the empire and bring them in and Romanizing them. Another one is that the troops in Newcastle in the 4th century are called the Corvoni. Now, the Corvoni, this is something I find really interesting, and I wonder if I can do it again with a map. Give me a moment and see if I can do this. But the Corvoni, everyone always thinks of them as a tribe in the south of... one sec. Everyone always thinks of the Corvoni as a tribe in the south of England. Will this show the right information? Yeah, it does show the right information. So I'm going to whack this up and then I'll move over a wee bit. Cool. Hope you can all see that clearly. And by the way, I have noticed you've been sending in questions, but I'll answer them in one moment. So there you go. You've got me there. So late Roman Britain. I'm just going to move this back. There you go. Yeah. So late Roman Britain. There's a tribe down here, Corvoni, but there's also these guys up here, Cornavani. On Hadrian's Wall in the late Roman period, there's a cohort of Corvoni stationed in Newcastle. So I wonder, you know, with the Roman tricks, are they using troops from what is now the north of Scotland on Hadrian's Wall? Perfectly viable to sort of think of that, and to think of that as a possible solution or understanding. But I'm going to do some more study on that. I've signed up to go and do archaeology at Newcastle University in September, and I've been accepted. So I hope to be doing a Masters in Archaeology over the next year from 2022-2023. So I can always look at some of the research for this. Right, Dennis, sorry, apologies there. How many people of the UK have Roman ancestry today? What's a Roman? Really good question. I'm just going to read the other questions and then I'll come back to you, Dennis, because I think that's a really good question. Rational. Have you heard of the youngest yet British Roman Colosseum recently discovered while excavating for construction recently in the news? Would you be able to put a link or tell me what part of the country it was? Because was that today on the Thames? I think I saw that pop up on my phone, but I've been very busy today. But I've heard something, but I don't know anything about that yet. I'll need to read up about that. Clans and dynasties. Myself and Shane need to get you on and talk about Roman Ireland when we covered this before. We can. I need to do more reading. I feel I need to look at that. But to go back to Dennis's question, what is a Roman? Rome is not an ethnic empire. This is really important to note. Rome is a citizen empire. So, something that people don't get about Rome is that when you joined up in the legions and stuff like that, we talk about people getting citizenship. Citizenship is desirable. People want to become a Roman citizen. You get a lower rate of tax, you get rights, so you actually get legal rights that before you didn't have. Alongside that as well, you also become Roman, and the Romans, they were xenophobic, they were really racist, and so they viewed the outsiders as less. So when they view the outsiders as less, this is a really big thing. So if you are an auxiliary soldier, you're always going to get sneered at and looked down on if you retain your cultural identity from your previous people. So like we have an example of an Egyptian who says, oh, my old name, I'm no longer using my old name, Mum and Dad. My new name is, and he chooses a Roman name. I think it's something like Marcus or something like that. But in the same way, on Hadrian's Wall in Vindolanda, we have Alexanders, we have Mariuses, we have Marcuses, we have all of these Latin and Greek names. And they take loads of Latin and Greek names. These guys are Batavians and Batvians. They're Dutch. They are Germanic Dutch troops on Hadrian's Wall. And they're taking Greek and Roman names. Why are they taking Greek and Roman names? Because it's not sexy to look German. It's great to be German because you're a great warrior. But if you want to be a Roman, you don't stay German. You Romanize. You take on a Latin name, you learn Latin, you become Roman. And so, this the whole idea of it's a really difficult one. How many people in the UK have Roman ancestry? Probably most of the white British population and the white European population have Roman ancestry, because even the Britons who remained would have seen themselves as Roman. And on top of that as well, you've got to think not only just the Britons, but if you think of anyone from the Middle East who's moved to Britain in the last 20, 30 years, they would have been a part of the Roman Empire. So if you have Syrian, Iraqi, Egyptian, Turkish, Greek, when I don't include Greek in the Middle East, but I'm just now listing nations, anyone from Croatia, Romania, anywhere in North Africa, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Spain, all of these places, they're Roman. So if anyone from those countries comes and they are now British, they've got Roman ancestry. Just like I probably have Roman ancestry on at least one branch of my family. My mum's side of my family is from Ireland, Scotland, and north of Hadrian's Wall. Whereas my dad's side is from Wiltshire and London and possibly France, which is where the surname comes from. But we're still recovering from that as a family 1,000 years ago. But the probability is that they were Britons living on a land belonging to a French knight, and that's why we're called Isles, I-L-E-S. Which, terrible thing to be named after a French person. But that's another matter entirely. I say that as a joke. I'm not racist against the French. It's just one of my closest friends in school was French, and so I had a lot of fun winding him up. So that's my answer to your question, Dennis, is I'd say, how many people in the UK have Roman ancestry? Most, probably. Also, the simple fact is that even places like Scotland and Ireland, as much as the places claim pure Celtic ancestry, no, there's too much mixing of people over the last 1,000 years, if not the last 2,000 years, that I would happily say that those people would also have very, very strong Roman connections just as much as anyone else. And it all depends on how much, Roman citizenship was given to tribes north of the wall, or people recruited and then went back home. If you're an Irish auxiliary working in Greece, do you stay in Greece or do you go back home? Probably stay in Greece because you have probably got addicted to civilization by that point. But, if not, maybe you go back home and you take home your pay and you live as a literal king because you've suddenly got, chainmail plus your gold coins plus all of the other things, and you set up trade routes and you live as a king in Ireland. Why not? Because you suddenly increased your living life expectancy, and you're having a great time. They found burials in Norway that actually have Roman armor in from the first and second century. These guys are auxiliary soldiers who have settled back in Norway. They've returned home after their service, and they've got gladiuses and Roman chainmail, Roman armor in burials in Norway. So the Roman Empire wasn't just recruiting from within it; they were recruiting from all over. They found recently, in the last, I think it's 5 years, a massive Roman recruitment site, 3rd century, in Poland. It's a massive fort that was used for recruiting Roman soldiers in Poland. Poland is considered very far outside the Roman Empire, but they were recruiting soldiers in Poland. The empire is really quite interesting. So that's why, I find genetics really interesting, because it's more important today who you are culturally, I think, than genetically. Due to the fact that, genetically we're everywhere. We're everywhere. Most of the people, if you draw a line, a crescent from Brittany to Norway, and then you include the British Isles and Ireland, and even Iceland, because Iceland started off as an Irish colony of Irish monks in the 4th century, and Irish people in the 4th century, and even possibly earlier, then you are sharing 85% of your DNA, maybe 90. We're so interrelated. So genetics isn't as important, I think. I think culture is important, and obviously massively who you are as a person. I like to poke fun at anyone who goes, I'm a Viking, because I'm like, well, you're not. Because first of all, that's a job description, and second of all, even if you were Scandinavian, culturally, a modern Scandinavian is very different. And your Scandinavian DNA, how do you know that that's from the 7th to 10th century? How do you not know that your great-granddad or your great-great-granddad or your great-great-grandma was actually a Swedish or Norwegian economic migrant? Your whole understanding of yourself as a Viking goes out the window when your ancestor was an economic migrant in the last 200 years. Because you can't be that specific with DNA. Unless obviously there's specific signatures in the DNA from a specific group within that period of history that you can be more certain of. So when people are saying, "Oh, I'm Viking," well, what about the fact that the Scandinavians converted in the 9th century? Some Scandinavians converted in the 9th, 10th. They were Christian for longer maybe than they were Germanic pagan. It's hilarious. Sorry, that's another rant. And if I've insulted any Germanic pagans, I'm not intending to. You practice your faith, it's absolutely fine, but just genetics is do not base your faith on your genetics. That's what I'm saying. That is my monologue. So we've got 10 minutes until I'm going to wrap the stream up. I just wanted to ask, is there any more questions you'd like to ask me? Or are you all happy? Or where are we at? Because it's been class. I know, numbers, we've had at most 9 people tuning in at one time. I've been keeping an eye on the top corner. But it doesn't matter about numbers sometimes. Quality over quantity, let's say that. Until I've got quantity, and where I'll say it's quantity and quality. But I'll keep doing these because it's good fun. It's nice to touch base with you and to just chat. But yeah, are there any more questions before we wrap up? Most Vikings were peasants. Most people were peasants. I'll post something later about Norwegian modern pagans. I think it's fine. I know that there's a new temple to Thor that's just been opened in Iceland in the last, I think, 5 to 10 years. If people want to do that, happy days. But it's just if a faith, I think, is separate to your culture and your genetics, because that's something that faith is individual to a person, and I think that's quite important to not base your faith on your genetics. Can we match or not segments of ancient DNA samples, and can we trace our haplogroups back to Africa? And just saying, rational. That's dangerous territory. I understand what you're saying, and I'm very interested in stuff like that because I wonder. There's a lot of interesting stuff where I think conclusions have been drawn due to sometimes political things, and that's not me siding with any political group such as the far right. I think that there needs to be detailed research because we're learning that human history is far more complex. We're learning that there are new species of human, like on a much more recent, there's species of human coming from China, from Southeast Asia, species of Neanderthal being discovered. There's way more diversity to the human existence than we allow for. And so I would say you can look at ancient DNA, and there are the signatures where you can tell where certain groups are from, but the magic comes when you take DNA and combine it with isotopes. Now isotopes, you may already know this. If I'm teaching you to suck eggs, I apologize. But when you are growing up, so until when you lose your baby teeth, you are eating and drinking, and when you're eating and drinking, the food and the drink that you have then builds up inside your teeth and your bones, creating a signature comparable to the food and the water that you're drinking in the area you live. So that tells scientists they can compare that signature with the location, so you then combine your DNA with your isotopes and then get a better understanding because, let's say the Roman period, highly mobile, people are traveling across the world. So you have a German ending up in Egypt. So how do you know he's German? Well, his DNA and his isotopes. So that's an interesting one there. So that's the sort of thing I'm saying about isotopes plus DNA gives us a much better period of history than people would allow. And I think that's the interesting bit. How do we make a donation? I believe it's through YouTube. I may not have set it up yet. If not, if you like to private message me, I can do a PayPal, but I may not have set it up properly before the stream, in which case that's on me. And I'm sorry about that, because hey, who doesn't like getting paid? But I thought you could do it through YouTube, so if you want to have a look at that, if not, message me privately and I'd have a look at that. Toto Kaka, didn't get the alert. I'm sorry about that. I hate to be that YouTuber, but if you click onto the bells, you should get notifications whenever I put up videos or live streams. And if you're subscribed, that's great. But I'm sorry about that. So it seems that we're all some sort of apes. Probably, I'd say that's true. Rational. I agree 100% as to some of the politics or religious scenarios not supported by the evidence. Yeah, it depends on the person. Really depends on the person. Ptolemies. I don't know what that Ptolemies is. I will look that up and have a look at it. Otzi, I do know who Otzi is. I will have a look into those topics. Again, I'm trying to focus on the British Isles because it's an area I know about, but Otzi is interesting. I might do one on Otzi and also on the Avebury archer who was found down at Stonehenge, who came from Switzerland and is... I don't want to say contemporary to Otzi because I might be putting myself in hot water there, but he definitely came from Switzerland, so they're both alpine. And it'd be very interesting to look at the Amesbury Archer and Otzi, but it may be a couple of months away, Toto, just in case. And my production schedule is normally I will film 8 to 10 videos, then I'll edit them, then I'll schedule them, and then I will have probably about a month and a half where I can create more videos and then I schedule them and put them out. So normally there may be, the videos you're watching now were probably created 2 months ago. So that's my release schedule. I've got stuff will push me through into March, and I'm going to be creating stuff over the next 2 months that will put me into the summer. So that's my release schedule. But I feel as if I focused a lot on prehistory, and so I want to do more on sort of medieval history, Roman history. Might try and touch on Celtic, but there's so little we know that I'd need to do more reading. And I want to do some industrial history too, because I feel as if I've really neglected that, and I'd like to look at some industrial stuff too. So that gives you an idea of what I'm wanting to do. But, pardon me, sorry. Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Scottish borders. Pardon me. Anglo-Scottish borders is in the medieval period and 300 years of warfare across the border. Also wanting to look at the Roman history, going to do walk Hadrian's Wall and film on that in Roman kit. So that's our next project. And then once I've got all of those up and running, that'll be some of the really cool stuff that I'll be doing next. Yeah, but please, doesn't mean I won't do it in the future. Is the Ptolemies battle the Bronze Age or Neolithic battle from Germany? Massive battle, one of the earliest battles we know of in Europe. Or am I misremembering that? Like a massive mass grave sort of thing. Just tell me in the comments, because that's what I'm remembering, but I'm not entirely certain. Is it German or is it Poland? I'm just waiting for the chat to refresh. I think there's a minute or two delay, possibly. But yeah, that's Bronze Age stuff, I think, if I'm remembering it correctly. It could be Neolithic, but again, I'm just learning as much as I can. And hopefully doing the Masters in Archaeology will really help. Combined with that as well, like the dream is to do a PhD, but only if I'm good enough. To lens? Have I done that British thing where I've anglicised it horrendously? I'm also dyslexic, so do forgive me. I'm just having a quick look. Yeah, German. Yeah. 1997 battle site, thousands of bone fragments, very large number of people, 1250 BC, so Bronze Age, yeah. Bronze Age battle site found in a fen. Ooh, really interesting stuff. So that would have been one of Europe's earliest battle sites. I'll have to look into that, yeah. I'll have a look because it's really interesting. And I don't know of any Bronze Age battle sites in Britain. I know of lots of deposition. There seems like the Bronze Age people were really keen about chucking items into pools of water and ritually burying items, even when like it seems mad to us, and we don't know why, because most of Northern Europe and Western Europe is illiterate at this point. Unless they were writing on wood and it's been lost to us, they just don't seem to have written, and so it's a real pity. We just haven't a clue of what's going on. Why are they chucking all of these wonderfully expensive items into water? Makes no sense to us, but it's what they're doing. Hundreds of people. From what I remember, it may be close to thousands. It's like insane. It's a proper massacre. I mean, looking at ancient prehistoric violence, there's loads of prehistoric violence you could look into. Like from the Neolithic, it's very visible. Mesolithic, they've started to find like flint arrowheads in people's spines and stuff. Really horrible stuff. Again, if you would like to donate, feel free, but in no way do I ever like expect people to. My hope is that one day YouTube will generate me an income, and I'm aiming towards that. At the moment, I'm sitting on about 2,000, just under 2,300 hours watched, and I need to hit 4,000 hours watched. So like, if you can't afford to, like, if you would like to donate but you can't afford to, again, no expectation on my part. I want that to be really clear. I'll only donate if you feel comfortable with that. But on the other side of the coin, like just sharing the videos and getting people watching them and getting people subscribed, that helps so much more. Bog people scare you. The bog people are a really interesting one. I think that, again, how much are they human sacrifices? How much are they willing? Like, for instance, the guy in Denmark, again, I won't try and pronounce it, but the famous Danish one where he's wearing his hat, the pyramid-style hat, and he's hanged, then stabbed, then buried in the bog. It's almost like he's willing. it's, you know, and it's terrifying for us today that someone would be a willing sacrifice. But like you have to get into the mindset of those people, and you know, people can be equally connected to political and social movements today as they were back then, and you know, religious movements too. So these people could be very, very willing sacrifices, but it's just what they are. You know, bog people are weird, and there's a couple from Britain that I know of, but I need to study them more. I love prehistory as well, because we know nothing and we know everything. We know what we have, but we have no idea what it means. It's brilliant. Now, I realise we've gone over 9 o'clock, and I actually promised my wife that I'd be done by 9, but I really hope you've enjoyed the stream today. I'll take a couple of last questions if anyone has any. Yeah, the mindset. The mindset to be a human sacrifice. It's like Celts fighting naked. You know, what people don't realise is those people were a living sacrifice. That's what's nuts about it. If you're willing to fight naked and you survive that battle, the gods have been on your side. It's like running into the middle of a war zone today naked and then coming out the other side. You're going to believe there's some sort of special protection on you. Whereas if you die, you were always meant to die. You were a sacrifice. You dedicated yourself to a god and you willingly died. It's nuts. You know, that's the sort of thing we're looking at. Anyway, sorry, I love looking at that. Not because it interests me. I think some of you know, but I'm a practicing Christian. But to study the sort of the mindset and the way people were thinking and that sort of stuff, it's a really, really interesting one for me. Hi, Rational. Yeah, no Stone Age. I don't think any Stone Age people lived in caves. I think people buried in caves. I think we find items in caves. I think we find paintings in caves. But I am really skeptical about anyone living in a cave during the Stone Age. I just think it doesn't make sense. I really don't. Even if you think about cooking, it makes cooking so much harder because the smoke has nowhere to go. I think they lived in portable tents and they moved around the place. Yeah, so that's one for that. Thank you, clans. I really appreciate that too. What I'll do now is I'm going to give it 2 more minutes. So if any last questions can come in, they can. But then I will end the stream at 7 minutes past 9. And then we can just finish up. And I really hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. And that you're all safe and well. Because it's been really good fun tonight. And really appreciate everyone tuning in who's tuned in. Well, you can live in a cave. You can live in a cave. I wouldn't advise it. I just think they're a lot more mobile. You'd think some people do live in a cave. But that's another matter. Another matter entirely. But yeah, thank you for sharing your brain. For what it's worth, you're welcome. Very much for what it's worth. What's your name? Is that Zuberance? As in Zuberance. Rational Zuberance. Cool. You're welcome, Baba June. Would that be like Baba as in like grandmother, by the way? Because that's a brilliant use of the word Baba. Some cultures it means granddad, other cultures it means grandma. Drill caves. Would you be able to like maybe write a comment on one of the videos or like send me an email about that? Because I know there was mining. I know of the flint mines down in the south of England, in East Anglia. There's massive flint mines. So I know about that. But drill mines, I don't know about drill caves. It's something I've not come across. Yeah, exactly, Rational. I agree with you there. That's where the evidence survives easiest because of the fact it's not exposed as well, or it's caught up in layers of material. Right. Oh, my age is. No, I'm not pleased, Babatune, and no insult to your age whatsoever. But before I can dig myself into a massive, massive hole and cause any further offence, I'll draw everything to a close and thank you so much for turning up. It's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and hopefully I'll bring up a more edited version of this, cutting out the section where I mute myself by accident for the first, I think, minute or two. But safe journeys and God bless, and have a lovely rest of your evenings, and I actually look forward to chatting to you all soon. A cat's nickname. There's a story in that, I'm sure. Anyway, have a lovely rest of your evenings, safe journeys and God bless, and talk to you all soon.